I had no idea when we came up with this idea. At first I was doing this on my own, and I ran into Erin and I said, how's your book coming along? She says, it's coming out in April. I said, mine's coming out in April. I said, I have a talk I'm doing, and I'll have about 30 people there. Would you like to do this with me? And Erin said, let's talk. So we got together and we had lunch, and Erin, look what we built. So ecstatic. I'm going to let Erin take her seat. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes and read one chapter, and then I will hand it over to Erin. I know a couple of questions that are on people's mind in this group, and I'm going to try to address some of them barely, so don't get too excited about that. So I really like to start by introducing some of the members of my family. They've known about my book, which is loosely autobiographical for the longest time, and they've been good sports about it. My father, Herbert Pollack, my mother, Sandra Pollack, and now let's hold our applause for until I stop for the rest. They deserve their own round. When you get to 90, you deserve it all. My husband, Steve, my cousin, Martin, Ray, and his wife, Cindy, my cousin, my daughter, Melissa, and that's the family here tonight. A few people here are pseudo-characters from my book. So, pseudo, because it's fiction, and it is so loosely autobiographical, but it's up to you to figure out what you think is autobiographical and not, because I ain't telling it. It's going to sell more books if I don't tell you. Maybe in about 5 years, get in touch with me. I'll let you know. But my dear friend Phyllis, who is AKA Ruthie, stand up and wave. Yeah, she was Sylvia. I was working on this for 18 years. I got a little bored. I changed her name and a couple of her names too. And then I also have my daughter, is sort of kind of Hallie in the book, the daughter. And the only thing she said to me after she read it recently was, did you have to name the Dalmatian in the book Lucky? Now everybody knows it's me. But it's not. It's fiction. And Dalmatian went everywhere with all of our kids, right? So, and then my daughter's dad, Paul, who is AKA Stuart, but let me make this clear, he is nothing like Stuart. And I have to apologize to my friend Stuart, whose name I borrowed, and the character's kind of creepy, but nonetheless, that's that. So the most important thing, though, I need to do is, aside from, as I said, thank you to those who've reviewed. I'm not going to mention everyone there in the back in their credits, although as I eyeball Stephanie. Stephanie's the one who helped me with the title, because it really would have been just a Meshugenah love story. But when I met with Stephanie about 3 years ago, maybe, we both were talking about the projects we were working on, and I found out what she does for work. And I told her the basics about my book, and she's a psychologist who specializes in helping daughters and sons, too, or daughters of children of narcissistic parents. And hold that thought, because everybody's going, your mother's in the room. I'm about to explain that to you. So she said, this sounds like the classic journey of a woman who had parents who were not as emotionally available. And I said, well, I've made Jody into enormous fiction. My parents and I are close, but I'm going to keep working this character that way. And that's when I exploded into fiction. Because at first it was just mildly about autobiographical situations with our family reunion and whatnot, and most of that got cut. And so the beauty of that was, thank you, Stephanie, because with narcissism in the news now, it was the right title. So the Narcissus's daughter, a Meshugenah love story. Is there anyone in the room who still doesn't know what Meshugenah means? So it's Yiddish for crazy, and there is a Yiddish glossary in here. So just want to tell you that. So as far as my mother, okay, so everybody, the question I get asked all the time is, what'd your mother think of that book? What'd your mother think of that title? So I finally texted my dad, yes, at 90-something. He's an amazing texter on his brand new iPhone. And I said, could you please have Mom think about what she would answer to that question? So today I get on the phone with my mother and I mentioned this. She said, I haven't known you're going to want this. Dad may or may not have said something to her, but she didn't know. And on the spot, I put on my journalism cap. Those of you who know, that's what I was doing before writing this. And this is just a real treat for me from everything I've done with some of you as my writing students through the years. My mother, I put on my journalism hat, and this was her reply. I was typing with my headphones on and the whole thing. I'm so excited for you that it's finally happened to you after all these years. What that could mean on the side is, thank God it's over. It's been going on for 18 years. She published 2 books, one in 1979 called Alternative Careers for Teachers, and one in 2001 called The Making of a Woman. And I don't know, The Making of a Woman is available online. Mindy Pollack, and I may even revise it and fix it up. Lee's in charge of my guests of honor coming in here, so I'll keep going. But Charlotte and Linda, I am so happy to have you here. Please. I'll tell you why when they get settled. But so Mom said, and she said to me, don't mention my books. She said, I want this night to be about you. And I thought, that's the only thing anyone needs to know that that's not a narcissist. She's caring about the attention of me. And I said, but I want to share my gifted genetics. So I told them that you publish your book, and there's that. So then she went on to say, she said, I'm just delighted that the book is out in the world. That's the most important part of it. It's a very well-written book. If that's the way you see it and you're a fiction writer, then that's the way you write, I'm happy for you. So thank you, Mom. That was my best review. And there actually was another review from my college friend. Did I mention to my other college friend, Judy, that Linda Dango posted on Kindle. And she really addressed what this book is about. For those who don't yet know, you can read what it says, and it sounds like Mindy's writing a memoir. No, it's basically about the story of people who are going through a love relationship, two adults, a mother and a daughter, and a mother and a daughter, adult daughter, who had some difficulties. And I'm really pleased to say that according to my buddy there, Stephanie, I've learned how to achieve the closeness that comes if you do the hard work. So Mom and I, at 90-something, are buddies again, as we were before I was 11. And the middle part of the story has some truth in it, but it's fiction. Okay, so with that, I would just like to take a second and read a part of a chapter for this reason. The food that's over there, it's because of this chapter. So I'm going to stop at a point that probably has no ending because I talk too long, so I want to pass the baton to Erin. Interfaith time. So I have to say, this is the love interest of the protagonist. So her name is Jody and the protagonist is Sam. Interfaith time, he teased when he pulled into the driveway. Corned beef and prosciutto on rye. We both snickered. If only interfaith issues were this easy. But the truth was, Stella, Isaac, and Deborah, extended family, made me feel so welcome from the moment I saw them, despite no doubt struggling with painful emotions as they met the woman taking their dead daughter's place. As they approached the car, any remaining fears of mine evaporated. Stella reached us first, hugging me tightly into her soft body with its slightly thick waist and hips and ample bosom that felt so safe. She wore a flowered cotton dress and had tucked her long snow-white hair into a loose bun. Welcome, my dear. And now I'm going to jump a little bit down there as we walk into the house, as the characters walk into the house. The delicious smell of lunch hung in the air in every room as we followed one another on Sam's quick tour of his family home. The aroma of spaghetti sauce followed us to the room Sam called the captain's room because it curved out over the ocean like the bow of a boat, where smooth water was lapping at the rocks below. The scent of garlic wafted upstairs into Stella's bedroom with its faded blue, green, and yellow flowered wallpaper and mahogany bed set. The man's bureau was probably in the same spot as when Sam Sr. was still alive. My Sam's childhood bedroom was now a sparsely decorated guest room, with the exception of yellowing karate and art certificates cluttering one wall, which I took a minute to savor. The familiar smell of chicken soup lured us back to the kitchen, where dozens of well-used pots and pans of all sizes dangled from the ceiling in the one renovated space of the house. Bubby would fit right in with these people, I already could tell, and so did I. She's sitting next to me, Isaac announced, as we all found our places around the mahogany dining room table. It was covered in a white lace tablecloth, slightly yellowed with age. I could make out the initials, SSP, perhaps a wedding present to the newly married Stella and Samueli way back there before there ever was a Samueli Jr., who was a late-in-life surprise baby for Stella and her husband. How can I go wrong with two handsome men around me? I flashed a version of my high school award for nicest smile to Isaac, then to Sam. And I meant it. My stomach had completely unknotted and my limbs were loose, relaxed. I felt happy. I could be myself with these people. And I was hoping to get to the point that talked about the food that's there, and I haven't. But there's a lot of, I'm going to stop at that to let Eric come up. There's a lot in the book about Jewish food, and then there's some about the Italian food. And of course, when I talked about the loosely thread to memoir, I left out the love of my life here, who everyone says, is he as fabulous as that character? And you know what? I'll leave it at that. So the food over there, we have some hummertaschen and some rugula and some pizzelles. So I covered the interface on that. We have corned beef and pizza, and whatever else we have. Please help yourselves and get up there. And I end by coming down to give my mom this. Great job, Mom. I turned out awesome.
Great job, Mindy, truly. I am so glad to be here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to those who helped with the book and with the launch, including my husband, Donald, my son, Derek, and my good pal, Mary Jane. Especially thank you to Mindy. I'm here tonight only because of Mindy. She approached me at the high school musical, Fiddler on the Roof, and invited me to join her as the bonus author for this event, knowing that I had been struggling to finish my book about a year behind schedule, following a rather trying and difficult year. It's been such a boost for me to be part of this, to share in the excitement and the enthusiasm, and to observe how Mindy planned and organized the event. She invited my thoughts and input, but the credit goes to her, and I am grateful to you, Mindy, for reaching out to me. Also, special thanks to my mother, who is not here. May 1st was the one-year anniversary of her death, and that was part of the challenging year. But prior to her death, Mom read a proof copy of my book. It was the last book she ever read. My mother was a lifelong reader, but after a long, difficult operation some years ago, she seemed to lose her focus. I sent her the book just so she could see it. And first she said, well, I'll read a few pages. A couple weeks later, she told me she'd read the whole thing. I wasn't sure whether to believe her. So I quizzed her about some of the characters and the events. And she got them mostly right. After that, her interest in reading seemed to decline again. She went back to her murder mystery videos, and then she passed. But somehow she got through the book. And here's to you, Mom. I thought I'd mention some of the challenges and developments of writing this particular book in Regalia with Native American themes. It's quite different from my first two, which I call Young Women's Adventure Stories, very loosely based on my own experiences, using the point of view of a young white woman exploring unfamiliar worlds. For those books, I had a kind of blueprint to follow. For Spanish soap operas, it was The Wizard of Oz, which takes place, the book takes place in Manhattan, and what's better than that for Oz? The other book, Blue Eyes and Black Wonderland, is modeled after Alice in Wonderland. Sort of playing with the storyline and some of the characters. But Invergalia is quite different. Came to me fairly intact and without a similar kind of model. Where did the book come from? Mainly from my fairly recent immersion in local Native American culture through an organization called Mass Society of Native American Awareness, and it's the group that I'm donating to. That interest evolved over time. First, attending the Meshugenah powwow on Cape Cod with my husband and children when they were young. I went for curiosity, but something there touched me. And then it was through my connection with local resident and parent Claudia Foxtree, who is here with us this evening, and her family drum, learning some of the songs and the traditions. Then through DNA, finding distant native ancestry, Mi'kmaq, Huron, and Nipissing. Finally, I became a member of the organization and have attended many of their events, learning a quite different perspective on New England and American history. There were several challenges in this book. 3 narrative voices, all related and overlapping in reference to some of the events of the book. The 40-year-old white woman who is a nurse is closest to my own point of view. After that, there are the journal pages of her deceased sister, 10 years younger, after coming out of chronic addiction. And for that, I had to explore the world of addiction and talk to people who had been through that experience. The biggest creative leap are the blog posts of a 20-year-old Native American named Izzy, who is two-spirit, a Native way of referring to gay, bi, or transsexual. That was a big leap for me. For that, I pulled mainly from my relationships with millennials and friends in the LGBTQ community to learn what that experience might be like. A huge part of the challenge of the voices was to keep the timeline accurate and details and names consistent. When I finished with the book, it occurred to me why it came in 3 strands. And that was because it was a story that braided together. They were the parts that did, were part of each other's lives and added strength to their experiences. The next was the challenge of researching topics, things that I didn't know that much about initially. Allergies, addiction, visits to jail, adoption, Native American land and water rights. It was a lot. Now the thing is, I love to research, and I could end up doing lots of research and not actually getting the book, but I had to incorporate that, and I learned a lot on the way, and that for me is part of the experience and part of what I benefit from. So I had to stop. But what I learned mainly was that Native American culture is not monolithic by any means, and one of the biggest problems Native Americans face is that they're stuck in the past, romanticized or demonized, not really seen as contemporary beings. And that's starting to change, but that was partly where I was coming from. So there was the next challenge of cultural sensitivity and cultural appropriation. It's an issue you face when you're writing outside of the culture of origin or dominant society. And I had to think about it a lot. It's a tough one, and it's still not entirely clear to me where the lines are. But I decided it was a challenge worth taking, so I did. How I handled it was I had some readers with Native American background who were able to fill in some of the missing pieces, correct some things, and help explain the meaning behind some things. This created a major reframing of part of the story, a cross-country trip between a Native American man and a young white woman. My reader, who was a Native American man, said to me, it's not a fun, a fun road trip, let's see America. He said, there's no way I could cross through certain parts of this country without being accosted or assaulted for being Native and have to defend myself, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I had to change that perspective. I had to address it, because that's not my own experience. But I was able to reach people who could help me with what I didn't know. The last challenge was finishing the book. Oh my God, like Mindy. And we have some special issues, the two of us. We are women in midlife, and we were still involved in raising children, taking care of aging parents. We did go through the traditional MFA creative writing programs that, get you all in line and shape. We both had experience writing, but different kinds of writing. And mainly, I think, giving ourselves permission to take the time to address the topics that were important to us, and to hope and believe that we have something worthwhile to say. So I'm concluding by saying, I hope you'll read our stories, but also consider writing your own stories, fiction or nonfiction, your own truths that you have to share. It's very doable, and it's necessary to hear all voices and all experiences. It's one of the ways that people grow and change. So thank you. Thanks for coming.
So, what year was it? 2000? 1999? Charlotte's late husband, Jerry Kristen, Linda's dad, held a meeting in town to try to get Bedford Center for the Arts off the ground. And I went to that meeting, and I just was smitten. I was a PR person who hadn't been working. I was raising kids, and Jerry had a way. So I ended up very actively involved with him, and then Jerry passed away in what year? 2003. And Charlotte, in the meantime, and there were some others, Lee, wherever Lee is now, but Ms. Lee, were beneficial in getting me to start to teach my writing classes through Bedford Center for the Arts, which then, when this one went off to college and left me a little bereft, I thought I'd start a business, and that's when I started the Place for Words, and about 8 or 10 of you in here have been students of mine, and it's been a great journey. So I dedicated my book to Jerry, and also to Charlotte, because Charlotte's, I think, really the thread that kept my classes going. She really got we had 21 people. Those of you who don't know, I have the book that we produced for 21 writers back, and I have some silly pieces in there that are fun, back in 2011, and then it came out in Kindle, so it's still available online. And tonight I have a very few copies, and for anyone who makes a donation in my cause to 826 Boston, which is an inner city group that helps to bring students to writing through schools and programming and whatnot. If you make a donation of any amount, you can take the remaining 4 copies and there's Judy, I guess the next shift is coming, but I haven't trained them how to do it. Do you want to do it again, Judy, or you want a break? Judy, thank you for taking on. Judy and I have known each other since we were 17 in college, and she took on the sales of the book tonight just 2 nights ago when I saw her for the first time in a couple of years. So thank you for that. So questions and answers, and we're happy to take on anything. I want to add on to what you said, that when I gave my dad a copy of the book, those of you who have read it know the first chapter is smut, like 100% smut. So I gave it to my father, and I said, you may not want to read the opening. And he said, well, he says, kind of looks at me, and I said, well, it's not true. It's really all made up. This is all fiction. And he says, what do you mean it's all fiction? How do writers write fiction? When it's like going to a movie. When you're sitting in the audience, you kind of absorb what you relate to. And he thought that as fiction writers, we are bringing in mostly what we know. And Erin addressed it beautifully with a laugh, because we bring in what we know, And then we research what we don't know. And Mindy Whitney's son helped me with the Wave Mindy, helped me with the EMT chapter, which made Ruthie in a really bad way. And that's 1,000% fiction, Phyllis Ruthie. But he helped me get that emergency room, the EMT scene. And Rona, where's Rona? Over here, you're over there, helped me to research the hospital and psychiatrist because of her background as an occupational therapist. So I love the way you explained that.
Thank you. Well, let me say that it is an occupational hazard that if you have friends who read your books, they do think that you're in the books. And it's hard. I mean, I understand that. And it is true what Mindy says. We research, we make up. But I had a scene, not in this book, but Spanish soap operas, a major fire. And who did I consult? A firefighter. He's now the fire chief of Concord, by the way. I had a good source. But here's the thing. So after reading the book some time ago, my mother-in-law, who is also now passed, Rose, at some point she said to me, gee, Erin, I thought you'd be more careful about leaving the clothes in the dryer. She goes, after that fire you were through? You lived through? And I'm like, I never had a fire. She goes, yeah, it was in the book. She goes, and I said, no, I really didn't. And she goes, wow, yeah, I'm surprised. So you do have to trust us that we draw from what's familiar, but we do make up what we don't, so we can explore further.
It's a lot of fun making it up.
You get to be in charge of your own world.
And play with imaginary characters. As adults, you can't exactly carry imaginary characters around like our children could when they were little, but you can when you're writing fiction. That's why I didn't want to end it. I didn't want to give it up done.
So I have a question for you.
Yes.
It's for both of you, either or both. When you're writing dialogue, how do you go about creating an individual voice for each character?
Good question. And it is oftentimes, based on real people, just to keep it consistent and keep it kind of real. And generally, like for instance, if I had this Midwestern character, somebody I know who grew up in the Midwest, some of the things that they might say. But it is a thing that you have to make sure you're not just speaking in your own voice all the time. You also have to be careful you don't go into dialect that's too, stereotypical. So sometimes you just have to listen for it, and sometimes following the movies helps too.
I'll just add on to that. Those of you who know I'm a really crazy dog freak. I talk to my dog all day long. My dog has a personality. I've got language for it. I do the same thing with my characters. I just become in the room with that character and have the conversation as though I'm both characters. And the craziest thing is the chapter I just started to read, and it wasn't a very thrilling chapter, but I'm glad I read it for the interfaith story. When I started to write that one, I don't know where I was, because when I finished it, put it aside, looked at it the next day, I said, who wrote that? And all of the writers in here who've either heard me say it or experienced it themselves, and I'd love to hear what Erin says, you really tap into whatever you want to call it, a muse, a subconscious. Whenever I teach my writing classes, I see Jean smiling when I taught her at Lexington Adult Ed. First thing I say to all the classes were, you're going to think I'm weird, and I am weird, but I'm not as weird as I'm going to say. And you channel somebody, you have a muse, or it's your subconscious. So whoever that was who was up there dying to write, they came through me for that chapter. It came out of nowhere. Does that happen?
Yeah, motivation. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Any other
Before
questions?
we break for food and book sales and signing?
I have one.
Oh, we have Laura.
Yes,
Laura. Did you expect that?
Yes.
Okay, I was given a proof copy of Erin's book, and I read it in 3 days. Okay? Here's my question. There was a lot going on between the Indians and the Indians who married non-Indians, and some of them stayed in the camps where the Indians lived, and some of them left. Do you feel that Indians should make an effort to get into the big world or stay in their camps?
Whoa, that's want to ask whatever your name was.
I knew she was going to ask a tough one. And it is good. That's why I write the books, to ask the tough questions and get to think about it. And of course, I have thought about it. And I guess my answer is, I really think it's important that they have a choice of whether to stay in an area where you can be a majority yourself. You have that experience. The people around you are like you and can help you keep up some of the traditions, just like the Armenian community or the Greek community has, can have a community that keeps those things going. But I also feel that they should be allowed to redefine themselves outside the community, however they like, making choices that they want. It would be my hope that maybe going back to some of the communal experience and the traditions is a positive that makes them feel good and they take out with them into the further community. So I don't think assimilation is always the thing. I mean, I think there are things about a lot of different cultures that are valuable that we really need. And I think a few generations ago, the hurry to become really assimilated and be all-American, I don't know that works entirely well. I think some of the other stuff that's been preserved is important, and it's important because it helped societies last for a lot of years, and feel good about themselves. They were positives that got reinforced. So, God. All right, I think that's my answer.
I think we're done, but I do want to say that I have enjoyed I've enjoyed Erin's book. I cannot tell you, and the contrast of mine being a crazy story and hers being just such a beautiful, educational, humane book. I highly recommend it.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did actually.
Son of mine?
So I was just going to ask that, so when you write about clash in your novels across different themes of race, gender, religion, etc., and it's something you haven't experienced directly in your life, how do you kind of write about that? Is it things you've seen in the news, or kind of how do you create those clashes?
God, they ask hard questions. My family, I thought they were going to lob them to me. It's a great question, and it's a really big question. And I guess I have to start by saying, this is my answer, that maybe I'm not as protected as you might have thought. And that I had some more world experience that maybe I haven't completely shared with you. And no.
I just got for a long period.
I know, and so, but I think I had a situation, an opportunity early on, especially in my work in the theater, and living in New York and other places, to meet people of color and people of different cultures than my own. And meet them not just as, as colleagues or people putting on a show together, or I don't know how else you might say it, but it did introduce me to the idea, first of all, of white privilege, because how would you know it if you don't know it? And when I go out in New York with my friends of color, and we were looking to go to the club at night, and they'd say, okay, let's grab a taxi, and they'd say, okay, Erin, get us a cab. And I'm like, why me? Why do I have to do it? And they're like, well, you're white, and they're gonna stop for you. And that was a real thing. That wasn't just like a hypothetical abstract thing. So I think that was my bridge. And then I said to myself, wow, there's a lot of different experiences out there of how people negotiate in the world and live in the world. And it's very, but unfortunately, hard to have conversations. And I said, well, if I've been able to have this experience, maybe it's something I should start to share. So I have had my experiences. I have been made very uncomfortable by black men at different times in my life for being a young girl, a young woman in the city. But that's not the end of the story. There's more story to it, and that's kind of what I'm trying to work on. Okay, Ann?